welcome to the LearnOps Leadership Series. Today I have the pleasure in interviewing Adil Ibrahim, founder of Copilot Strategy. Adil is on a mission to help leaders optimize their L&D departments by streamlining systems, processes, and workflows required to run an effective L&D function. He's worked at companies like Meta, American Family Insurance, New Metrics, IHS Market, GLG, and more. Welcome, Adil.
Thank you. Good to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
So, Adil, you and I have actually probably known each other for, I don't know, maybe 3 years or so. And,
At least.
I've never had the opportunity to ask you about your story and your background and how you even got started with learning and development.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, you're right. That's such a great question. Thanks for asking me. I'll tell you, I've only been in learning and development for my whole career, and it was my second or my backup career. I actually was fully set on joining the military. I come from a military family from both sides, maternal side, paternal side. Everyone I knew growing up was in the Army. And when I grew up, it was time for me to join, but everyone above me, uncles, aunts, you name it, banded together to make sure that I wouldn't join, because my idea of adventure is in the civilian world an idea of danger. And so, I didn't. I listened and I didn't join. And what else is there in the world that I knew about? And that's what I now know as organizational behavior, organizational development. And I stumbled upon this after talking to half a dozen counselors and advisors in undergrad to say, what is this? And so I took a few classes on organizational behavior, organizational development. I was hooked. I became a tutor, and it started in undergrad, which is to be more transparent. It started at the end of undergrad, and so I did my second bachelor's. I decided to do my second bachelor's in human resources after finishing my first bachelor's, and started right after undergrad. Went to a bank, Flagstar Bank, still in existence, and went from there, and have been in learning and development ever since. That was back in 2008, in the middle of the financial crisis, and here we are.
Interesting. And I was taking a look at your LinkedIn, and I noticed that you had a nice referral or recommendation from somebody at that job, mentioning that you're an outside of the box thinker. So that's really interesting because of some of the questions that I'm hoping to dig into today, and given some of the work that I know you've been working on as well. There's been a lot of change in the industry over the last several years. I guess in your opinion, and in what you're seeing from helping different companies, what is the biggest change you've noticed? And also, what type of challenges do you still think that L&D has to really overcome?
Yeah. What's the biggest change, and what are the challenges that L&D has to overcome? I'll tell you, I'll go back to 2008, and there's been many massive changes, and I'd say the biggest one. I have a two-part answer. I can't pick one, so I'll tell you two, and they go hand in hand. So one side, technology has changed massively since 2008, and the LMS landscape is now learning experience platforms and learning enablement systems, and different terms for similar things. So on one side, technology has just boomed. On the other hand, there has been a shift in the mindset of learning professionals, but also those who are the stakeholders that are deciding to have learning in the organizations. And I think this mindset shift has been moving from the administration of how many people are in workshops or in some classroom, counting the butts in seats, if you will, and it's going slowly toward this performance behavior aspect? What's the impact on people's performance? What's the behavior change after this learning? And so it's refreshing to see more and more people adopt this new mindset where it's not just about sending people to a workshop and you listen to some lecture and you come back to work and go back to your old ways. And it's now more about meeting the learner where the learner is. And so combining this mindset shift with the new technology, I think we're in this beautiful place for the future of learning and development. I'm very excited about that.
Would you describe that as workflow learning, or in your opinion, what are some of the common terms of meeting the learner on their way?
Yeah, sure. Just in time learning, workflow learning, learning on the job. I so those are terms that are thrown out. Absolutely. The way I love to describe it is learner-centric learning or self-directed learning. And so instead of the organization or the corporation or the learning and development team deciding who needs to learn what, when, and where, the learner is deciding what they need to know now in their job. And so the way we live as consumers in our normal life on the internet, we search things on Google or YouTube and you name it. And so similarly, we want to be able to search for answers internally in during our work in our workplaces. And that's not simply searching for articles or searching for internal websites, but it's also searching for people who may have that answer. And so I think, in my opinion, the term that best describes it is self-directed learning, where the adult learner knows what they need to learn and what their questions are and what the gaps are most of the time.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a great way as well to learn. You said it. People are adults. They know what they want to learn and how they want to invest their time. But what
Yeah,
about when the company that somebody is working for has a problem, or they're trying to get to a new objective? So what's
absolutely.
the balance between the two? Because in those circumstances, maybe learning is a solution and you need to teach people a new skill or a new way of working to help get them to what the company is trying to achieve as well. um, is there a balance between the two? Do you think people are motivated when maybe a company will come to them and say, hey, we need you to learn this to help us get here? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, I do think there's a balance, and don't get me wrong. I don't mean to say that it's only directed by self-directed learning. I don't mean to say it's only directed by the learner and not at all by the organization. And so yes, I do think there's a balance. The balance, I believe, is not so binary where part of the say of who learns what, when, and where is by the organization, and part of the say is by the learner, the individual, and we kind of like share this. I don't think that's the lens that I like to use. The lens I like to use is there are different roles, and so the learner, at the end of the day, is the ultimate decider of which behaviors they will or won't adopt. And we can't force someone to change their behavior. We can threaten them and incentivize them and say, look, you don't learn this skill, then find another job. Like we can take those extreme measures, but at the end of the day, it's the adult individual who will ultimately decide if they will or won't change a behavior. So I have to say that that's one role. The other role of the organization is not so much of forcing learning upon others or forcing the development of skills upon individuals, adults. It's more of being a facilitator and creator of learning environments and creator of this social and peer learning uh, ecosystem where individuals can learn from each other when and where they need. Now, there are many instances when an organization may decide that for example, our sales org needs to start pitching this way and not that way. And our organization needs to start writing to clients more concisely and reduce errors, just as an example. And so let's say the organization decides we need to improve the writing skills of our entire business development team. And so I don't think in that situation the organization can go to the business development team is you all will learn to write better or else. I think it's more about showing them why they should learn about those new skills, why should they improve, and it still needs to be learner led, or still needs to be self-directed by the learner. It's just the creation of the environment, creation of those challenges that the learners can learn through, collection or curation of the experts who can teach each other. And so I think the organization should not see itself as one that forces learning upon them. It's identifying those gaps, absolutely, uh, but still leading the learners to the learning, and not necessarily forcing the learning upon them, if that makes sense.
I mean, you can lead, that saying, the horse to water, you can't force it to drink,
Exactly.
right? So,
Absolutely. Exactly.
and I buy that, right? And I think the learning leader or the team who's responsible for that intervention or that initiative, for example, should also be outcomes driven. And in the design of that solution, talk to a couple of those customers to learn about what's in it for them, so that when they position it to the learner, they can really position the whole with
Yes.
them, what's in it for them. Hey, if you're a salesperson, you're pitching like this. Actually, if you just pitch like this, the outcome with the data we have is that you'll close 20% more deals, which means you're going to earn
Exactly.
more commission and get money in your pocket. Do you want to learn this or not? So I buy
Yeah.
that for sure.
I, I was just going to add another layer to that, which is 100% agreeing with you, which is, yeah, it's more to take this servant leadership role as an organization, as a corporation, and whoever's driving this, to tell the individual in your example, this is how you can achieve more. This is how you can be successful. And here are the levers you can push and pull. Here are the skills you can develop. Let me show you where and how and from who you can develop these skills. And yeah, exactly that. Exactly what you said. Absolutely.
So that, considering this structure, and I know that you've helped to come into companies and get them to this self-directed learning strategy, and make sure that you can also enable L&D functions to support business strategy and for performance with this. Um, from what you're seeing, like what's the best governance model or team structure,
Hmm.
to do this effectively?
Yeah, that's the best governance model, or the team structure. This is a big question, and it's a big answer, and I'll try to make it concise. At a high level, I think one of the better team structures is to have clear swim lanes, if you will, speaking in proverbs here. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times a learning and development function will be stood up, and before that it'll be someone who's sitting in HR. It'll be their 20% side project, and what's 20% never gets done. And so the company will decide to stand up a learning and development team, and it'll be a few people who are doing a bunch of things, and that's absolutely fine when you're resource limited. The thing is, even with a few resources within learning and development, it is imperative to have these clear swim lanes of the delivery lines of learning and development. And what I mean by that is to have a clear distinction between design and development and delivery and digitization of your content, and very importantly, knowledge management, which is an LMS. And you can use an Excel sheet if you will, if you don't want to, if you're being very scrappy and bootstrappy, and not wanting to buy an LMS. The point I'm trying to come to is, it's best to refrain from a team structure where one or two people are trying to do all of it. So if, let's say, you have a team structure where it's just two people in learning and development, and let's say you're serving 10,000 employees, for example, it's great to take a decentralized model deploy the people in the organization to become friends of L&D and to become subject matter experts and content curators and content facilitators and things of that sort. And so for a team to try to do it all is where a lot of learning and development teams end up failing and end up not being able to scale. And then they resort to, let's just buy a ton of content that's already existing in the world. We'll deliver it to our employee base. Employees find that it's not even relevant or applicable, and it doesn't get used. And so coming back to your question, I strongly recommend teams to understand or figure out how they can decentralize learning and development. Also, how they can have very clear swim lanes of who can help them with what within design, delivery, uh, digitization, and also knowledge management. And lastly, I'll say if there's a team that has been running learning and development, is mature and has that system kind of defined already, large or small, a very important thing to keep in mind is you need to still be able to tap into the human population in the organization to make them involved in the learning process. That's very important.
So that makes sense, and I think what I heard, I might use a different word than what you said. I think you said making friends in a decentralized model with the other functions. Um, totally agree, especially if you're an under-resourced L&D function that's being tasked to do it all. You might not have um, an alternative then to run a decentralized or federated L&D model,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And you got to build those partnerships. So from your experience, and it might be different from company to company. I mean, we've seen a lot of different things to the point where there's a learning partner embedded in a business unit. Who is that
Sure.
friend? We've seen L&D teams build advisory board committees. What works to
Absolutely.
build those strong partnerships from
Oh my
some of
goodness. Yeah.
the best practices that you've helped to instill or that you've seen?
Yeah. Uh, I'm going to botch this example, but I'm stealing a page from Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And there's a story I'm pulling from memory where Dale is trying to convince someone to give him steel or something, and in order to do it, Dale says, "Look, I'll put your name on top of the building," and like he convinces the person to make this deal, which I'm forgetting the details of. And so I use that example to say one great way to encourage people to partner with learning is to give them visibility to the work that they're doing, which is in addition to their day job. And look, that doesn't work for every single person, but that is one pretty solid way of encouraging people to partner up because gaining visibility in an organization really helps a lot of people. For other sets of individuals, it's simply tying in the fact of the impact of the work that they will deliver. And so this is how you can improve people's working lives if you help us with this. And so those two big ones, and there's many other smaller ways of encouraging people to partner up with learning and development or the training team or the company name slash university or academy and however many names people use for training functions. But the way of giving visibility and showing the impact of their work on others really helps people or want to partner up with you and want to deliver and volunteer in this. It is essentially you asking them to volunteer.
That makes sense, and I agree. I always say to L&D leaders, who might have a partner or they're in a relationship or married, right? Imagine being partnered and not giving visibility to that partner into your life, right?
Exactly.
The partnership's probably going to fail. So you got
Absolutely.
to think of it like that too. We see a lot of teams leverage intake processes or L&D request processes to help kick off or nurture the partnership or the relationship. What's the problem you're having? How can we support you?
Yeah.
Um, what else have you seen, if anything, or would you say that a request process is one of the more beneficial ways to intake needs and to strengthen partnerships with learning and development and business functions?
Yeah, oh, I love talking about this. A lot of times when there's a central learning and development department, there will be requests coming in from all areas, especially if it's a somewhat new learning and development department. People are hungry for it, and they would start requesting all types of training needs. And learning and development department, the new one, or even established, is like overwhelmed with who do we say yes to, who do we say no to. And I love this because I've seen all types of intake processes. And I'd like to shift, and not escaping your question at all, but I'd like to shift that a little bit to from what's a great intake process to what are some things we can be doing so that we can strengthen whatever intake process we currently have. First of all, you need to have an intake process, but more importantly, I want to bring attention to, you mentioned learning business partners. And when you're able to have a learning and development business partner, either part of the L&D team or part of the volunteer workforce, the Friends of Learning and Development, whatever name you want to give them, they need proper training. They need proper learning or upskilling in behavior outcomes or performance goals as opposed to learning outcomes. And this is such an important point where I want to make two distinctions. One is a distinction between learning outcomes and performance goals, which is I could learn that eating healthy is good for me, but I may not have a behavior change in eating healthy. And so our learning delivery needs to be focused on behavior change, the performance outcome, not just understanding eating healthy is good for me. And so once learning business partners or these individuals who are the liaison between L&D and the rest of business understand that, they can go through their intake process, whichever one they're using, as long at least they have an intake process, to say, okay, business leader, you're asking me for communication skills training, for example. What is the behavior outcome you're looking for? And so when you ask those 5 whys and you go deeper and deeper to look at the actual behavioral change you're looking for, it becomes pretty clear many times to the business leader that this may not be a top priority because this behavior change we're looking for does not line up with this organizational need that we have. And so it makes it easier to say no because the business leader is many times already now seeing that this may not be priority. And so a lot of times the learning business partner doesn't even have to spell it out that much. It's you're both arriving at the same conclusion. And so to in summary, being able to say no is much easier when you have a behaviors or performance focused conversation, which is then very easy to then line it up or identify if it does or doesn't line up to the organizational goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, uh, there's some valid points there too, because if it's just the learning that they want, not the behavioral outcomes, then maybe buy it off the shelf, right?
Yeah,
Or have them
yeah,
self create. But if you want to partner with learning, which is much more than just the content, it's also the outcome and the aftermath, and you want to properly invest into the solution to do that, then that does make a lot of sense. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
where are things breaking down right now? Like what you know, one of the areas you help companies is streamlining systems, processes, workflows, to run efficiently and effectively, right? And
yeah, yeah,
clearly, you do that because not all L&D teams are there. And
yeah,
so, what are some of the biggest operational challenges that are actually holding back L&D?
yeah,
You know what
yeah.
what's going on right now?
Yeah, I think there's two big areas where things are quote unquote breaking down right now in this space. And one is what we were just talking about, which is this performance outcomes driven conversation. And while earlier I was talking about there is a mindset shift from learning outcomes to performance goals, absolutely. it is still, we still have a big way to go, a long way to go in that space. And so I think when there's, let's say, a training need or a learning need for a team of consultants who thrive on gaining insights and deductive reasoning. And so one may think, well, the only way we can make these consultants better is by giving them more information about the industry that their client is in. And so it is very easy many times to go back to, yes, give them more information, give them more understanding, and their behavior will change. And so, and that's not the case. We need to continue to ask, what do we need the individual to do? Not necessarily know, not necessarily understand, but what do we want them to do after the learning is delivered or after this learning experience? And so I think that is a big breaking point at the moment, where more people in the industry need to be better at converting learning requests into behavior or performance outcomes. And one tool that I recommend to many people is Bloom's taxonomy. It's used quite heavily in teaching circles and in academia, but not so much, surprisingly, in learning and development, which is also another branch of academia. And so I recommend a lot of people look at Bloom's taxonomy, which does help many people ask the questions of, what do you want the learner or this human to do after this learning experience. And that's one. And another place where I think a lot of things are breaking down currently is that the internal mechanisms of knowledge management within a learning team, even if it's a team of one or two or a team of 40, there are LMS systems and LXPs and LES, learning enablement systems. But you deliver a learning experience, let's say a challenge or a mentorship program, even or an apprenticeship program, let's say, and you get feedback from users, and you get uh, surface level feedback of this was a good experience or not good experience, but you also get observational feedback from them if they have behavior changes or not behavior changes. And recording that feedback and iterating on future versions and improving on this is where I think, where I see a lot of challenges. I see a lot of bottlenecks in this knowledge management iteration component, this innovation within learning and development, which documentation becomes a slow process. Nothing against Google Sheets, but we're still using very basic tools such as a Word document to, with bullet points of, things we need to change. And I think we can step it up in the project management or program management world by using many tools, and the ones that are coming to mind are Asana, Jira, Monday, etc. And so I think internal operations can be streamlined better, and I think this intake process, this tying everything to behaviors, can also be improved.
Yeah, and I do have to give us a plug there. Another great tool
Yeah,
is
sure.
Cognota.
Right.
But okay, so in regards to that, you know, what about like measurement, right? Because you mentioned some of these PM tools that you can consider to use or whatnot, but then you also alluded to L&D functions not having the right tools, still doing stuff very manually when it comes to feedback loops or evaluation. And one of the challenges we see is that a lot of these generic tools that are available off the shelf, they just don't, they're built for everybody in the organization, not
Right.
specific to the L&D workflow. So it stops, which forces people to then go back and do things manually, which is kind of against the purpose of having tools anyways. So
Yeah.
if we focus on, your comments about behavioral change, how do you measure effectiveness? Um, we see a couple things nowadays being adopted, from product management teams when it comes to like feedback loops or even using NPS. But what are some ways that you've seen be effective at measurement, and how does L&D work towards that, or do it more streamlined and capture that data as well.
Yeah. I want to answer this measuring of effectiveness thing, but before that, I want to take a sidetrack, and it's fine if we cut it. This NPS. Okay, so there is a big adoption. There's a heavy adoption on NPS scores, and I try to encourage as many people as I can to entertain the idea of using customer satisfaction, CSAT scores, instead of NPS scores. And so I'm a big advocate of CSAT, where NPS is telling you about your loyalty to a product or a program or an experience, where you will then, how willing are you to go tell a friend of yours about this experience that you had or this product that you used? And that's great, not really great though, because it's a learning experience, and the individual who's answering the NPS survey may not know anyone who this is or isn't relevant to, and there's so many other reasons where NPS just doesn't fit. Where what we really want to know is, was this relevant to you? And I'm still talking about surface level metrics, right? Like, we need to definitely go deeper than this. But while we are talking about surface level metrics, customer satisfaction scores really do answer the real question, which we're trying to get at. Was this relevant to you? Did you like it? Uh, does this satisfy your needs? You, the human, the adult, the learner? And so I'm a big proponent of CSAT versus NPS. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I
yeah,
mean, there's
yeah,
some
yeah.
debate about NPS being more of a vanity metric versus, performance outcome metric or something like that.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, and so speaking of performance outcome metrics, and not to oversimplify this, but I will, because we're speaking to people from all walks of life and learning and development and talent development. And so, speaking in generic terms, when we're looking at measuring effectiveness, I have to come back to Bloom's taxonomy, or the behavior that needs to be done. And so, let's say the behavior, and I'm going to oversimplify this again. Let's say the behavior that needs to be done is write more concisely, or an improvement in analysis skills for analysts, let's just say. And if that's decided, that that is the behavior outcome, whatever the behavior outcome is, and then we design, develop, deliver the training, or buy and deliver the training experience, or the learning experience, or the learning challenge, or the apprenticeship, whatever it is, we should be able to see with our eyes or hear from our ears, be able to actually observe if the thing is happening or not, and how many times. We should be able to count how many times the thing is happening, behavior. And so, uh, admittedly, I'm moving aside from certain industries where the behavior needs to be better insight. And so we're moving aside from that for a second. But these behaviors which you can count and see, the effectiveness is simply that. How many people are doing the thing that you wanted them to do after the learning experience? And so it depends on what the behavior was. Now, coming back to another side of this, the more complicated side, sometimes the behaviors are not visible, and the behavior is something as complicated as improve the insights that you're extracting from the information that you get, let's say in a client meeting. Still, we can measure the effectiveness of the learning experience by counting, it could be self reported, on people claiming if they are or are not experiencing better insights from themselves or from their peers. And so this can be 360 reviews, this can be from managers, this can be self reported, but it all comes down to, look at the behavior that you wanted to see after the learning experience or the learning challenge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And speaking of that, uh, what other data do you think should be captured to help, like, tell the overall story? You hear a lot of times that, L&D is trying to get a seat at the table, or you know that they're having technology challenges to capture data. Um, where do you think it's breaking down with
Yeah,
L&D, preventing them from getting that seat, preventing them from getting the right uh, data points to tell the more,
yeah,
that story that's going to help propel the function forward?
absolutely. Getting a seat at the table is, I think highly dependent on L&D articulating its value or being able to demonstrate the impact on the business. And for L&D to demonstrate impact on the business needs to be done by showing the behaviors that improve the business or the behaviors that didn't improve the business or performance outcomes that had a positive impact on the business. And what's very, very important for L&D to ramp up its skills on, and cobbler's shoes are the worst, and so sometimes L&D forgets its own learning and development. And one area for learning and development professionals to upskill on is business understanding business growth. And so if a company, let's say, wants to, as a real example, won't name names, if a company wants to double its revenue, the learning and development professionals, A, need to be aware of this organizational goal, but B, needs to be able to break down the doubling of revenue into levers you can push and pull for the company to be able to double its revenue. And so let's say one of the levers to do that is to sell more. Uh, okay, let's look at sales enablement. Or if one of the levers you can push for doubling revenue is to make more widgets. Uh, and so learning and development professionals need to be able to, well, know the organizational goals, be able to break them down into performance outcomes, actual behaviors, and then needs to be able to tie its current learning and development delivery to those performance outcomes. And so if, let's say, learning and development decides, okay, we're going to help the organization double the revenue, and we're going to do that through having people sell more, increase sales, and break that further down into, well, is that more outreach? Is that more, year over year retention of customers? Like whichever thing it is. And so continue to break that down until you can distill it to one single behavior for that one learning challenge or learning experience or apprenticeship or mentorship and things of that sort.
I
So
agree.
yeah, yeah,
Or even breaking it down to the skill level, right? Because
absolutely.
because it is something that CEOs focus on. Is like, how do I develop the right skills, etc. So I think also aligning to the verbiage that the C-suite is talking, or what they're saying is important, rather than trying to reinvent the loop and getting them to speak in your terms, and just showing that linkage. But I think
Yes,
you're right about that, about understanding the company's goals, or OKRs, objectives, whatever you want to call them. Learning where the gaps are, how L&D can build programs to help bridge those gaps, and then it
exactly.
becomes very clear on, the dollars invested by L&D to business outcomes received as well, where you can
Yes.
literally change the dynamics of a business. I remember from my earlier days, there was a person named Frank Cook, who I used to work with. He's retired now. He was the decision analysis practice leader at Chevron, and he basically taught the company decision analysis, or decision quality skills, and
Well,
they tied it. They were able to instill this into the culture and measure it so effectively that they actually pointed the program to the increase of stock price, after they did this
well,
for a few years. So it's pretty cool to
yes,
see, but that gets a
absolutely.
CEO's attention when you can point that your program that you invested into over the last few years increased the stock price.
Absolutely. And just that's such a great example. I'll tell you, uh, I like to have learning and development professionals have a relationship with the chief financial officer or the finance department, because tying dollars to training hours or learning hours is paramount for learning and development to get a seat at the table, because at the end of the day, for at least a public company, it is required by law to benefit the stakeholders or shareholders. And so this is not just for public companies, but for corporations. You want learning and development to be your unique advantage rather than something that you have as a team so that you can check the box to say, hey, yes, we do have an L&D function, to tell
Mm-hmm.
new hires that yes, we will invest in your development. It's more than that. It's to be the tool that you use to get ahead in the market. And now I'll tell you one thing on this point. I was having a conversation with the CFO of Ogilvy. This is nearly almost a decade ago, and I was telling her that if we take the book value of the company at this moment, and we take the market cap of the company at this moment, and the difference between the two, it becomes the human capital in the company. And a lot of people don't look at it this way. And I remember her, she was like, this is great. And she was wowed by it. And it's conversations like that that get L&D a seat at the table, to know the business vernacular and be able to define growth that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, last question I have: what there, the world's talking about a downturn. Obviously, stock markets, all of that are down. Valuations are down. What do you see the outlook of the L&D function in this market?
Mm. Oh my goodness. So I'll go back a little bit and also go forward a little bit. And so in the very recent past, I've seen this is just my experience. I've seen a boom in a way of the growth or the standing up of learning and development departments. I've definitely seen that. So that's one side, and I see that continuing with the downturn. I think there's going to be continued effort in growing and investing in learning and development. There's mentions of quiet quitting, and there's mentions of engagement and productivity as the new metrics that people are caring about. And um, I think along with the downturn, through the downturn, even after, this new investment in developing your employees and being more agile as an organization to compete with other competitors is going to continue. And so in previous downturns, for example, 2008, when I entered the training industry, one of the first functions to cut was learning and development. And I don't see that happening this time around. So yeah.
Yeah, no, we're seeing the same thing actually. More investment into learning and development, less investment on different delivery modalities. Like
Right.
they're making what they have work, but more investment getting the right programs so that the company can work more efficiently. And to do that,
Absolutely.
they're investing in ensuring that L&D is operating more like a business, more efficiently, more effectively. You
Yes.
see changes of where L&D is reporting to make them more agile and work more um, nimble. But still seeing the investments being made towards learning and development.
Absolutely. I agree. And I'll add, there's this great book, and I'm not connected to it or affiliated by any way, but there's this great book by Nick Shackleton Jones, How People Learn, and it's taking up the industry by storm, in my opinion, where yeah, more conversations are starting in these new L&D functions on making resources versus courses, or using learning challenges rather than learning workshops, and things of that sort. So I see that as an improvement. I see that as a reason for continued investment in it. And there's another, I think it's a textbook, and maybe not just a book, by it's Nick Van Dam, called Elevate Learning and Development. Is how to structure learning and development departments. And so I see peers of mine mention these books. I'm a recommender of them myself. And so I think all of this is going hand in hand with the continued investment in learning and development, which is great. Good to see.
No, absolutely. And that's a great answer because to the question I didn't ask, which is any resources or books to recommend. So with
Oh,
that
sure.
said,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Those are the big ones, I think.
with that said, I really enjoyed the conversation, Adil, and really appreciated your time today on the series, and excited to staying in touch and
Absolutely.
seeing you really help a partner with these L&D functions you've been helping. You're doing really great work, and excited to continue the friendship here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Ryan. This has been great.